Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that moves, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's beat these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right. Another week, and we're talking about a unique offseason as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 311. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with longtime NFL scout Dan Hatman. He's worked for a handful of teams, including the Philadelphia Eagles, and Dan now runs the Scouting Academy. He's one of my favorite guests to bring onto the show, and it's time to talk about big picture topics surrounding the team building process and organizational development, scouting, really anything having to do with the process behind the scenes. And today, Dan is going to join us to talk about some of the issues that all 32 franchises are facing heading into this draft cycle. So we're going to focus in on just everything that goes into April's NFL draft and how it's been impacted by obviously the circumstances that have impacted the entire country over the last calendar year. And I love having these kinds of discussions, especially with Dan. I hope you guys will enjoy it. Before we get there, though, a couple of quick things to hit on. First up, this will obviously be a big conversation having to do with the pre-draft cycle. And if that interests you, then you need to make sure you go over and subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast. 2 episodes a week. You get analysis from myself, Greg Cosell, Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell. We've got a rotation of other guests in the media, Eagles scouts, college prospects. We cover a ton, and you could find that show wherever podcasts can be found. Next up, I want to remind you guys to head over to our Apple podcast page and leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It would be a huge favor to me. It helps us out, and it helps gets the show more eyes and ears for other people that are trying to find podcasts just like this one. Head on over, leave a comment, leave a question, leave a rating. Really appreciate everybody that has done that recently. And we will, if you leave a question, we will always answer it here on the show. We do it every single episode. That being said, let's get this one started. It's time now to kick things off with Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, excited to welcome back here to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, a guy who's been on this show numerous times, and that's former NFL scout, former Eagles scout, Dan Hatman. Dan, thanks for joining me, man.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's talk through this because obviously, you are one of my go-to guys when it comes to these big picture discussions around the league and operations and, certainly the team building philosophy aspect of things. And this year, really over the last calendar year, has been such a unique set of circumstances. And I'm sure for you in your camp, it's going to be such an interesting case study 4, 5, 6 years down the line from here. Let me ask you this question, though. If you want to put your scouting hat on from if you were with a team right now and you're a college scout or just really anybody on the personnel side going into this draft season, what's like the prevailing emotion for you right now? Is it nervous energy? Is it anxiousness? Is it, are you excited for opportunity? What is like the overwhelming emotion for you if you're a team going into this offseason in this draft?
I asked around on this because it fascinated me as well. I love the question. What do you think you're facing? What are the stress areas? What are the things that bug you? Seemingly, guys don't seem overly bothered, upset, nervous, or anxious about this. The prevailing thought keeps coming back to we finally get to do what always mattered, which is just use the film.
Right.
We didn't get a lot of the in-person. We're not going to get a lot of the in-person. And so the priority is going to be how well they played football. I think the thing that's been interesting is that some people in the space have just gravitated towards the idea that we've always had players based on certain circumstances where we didn't get to check every box ahead of time. Maybe they dealt with an injury, so then they didn't perform at the combine or pro day, or maybe they just opted out of those events. Or, there's always been things that have kept us from getting universal, high-quality information on every single human being in the draft board. And so we've always had to deal with how do you weigh and value incomplete information. And I think that's become something that for people who are a little longer in the tooth in the industry, who can remember the days when we didn't have so many systematic things to raise the bar in terms of quality information, they have a lot of resources to draw upon to get over these hurdles because they did it for years. Whereas people that are entering more recently, when they walked into the NFL and everything's digital and everything's electronically timed at the combine and everything's high quality, and people have, the pro liaison at a school's got film set up for you and they know how to answer your questions. Like, going in and doing this stuff now, I'm not saying it's easy in general because you're still evaluating a human being, but we have systematically polished so many of the different information gathering mechanisms that you can almost get anybody in to check the boxes, right? The baseline information is really easy to obtain if you've got the logo on your sweatshirt.
Right.
That's not hard. What becomes hard is differentiating that from what everybody else is getting, right? Because if 32 scouts show up at a school and they all get the same information, you're not better than any of the 31 teams. Or what do you do when that information is not available? So when this all hit last March, and then we kind of, everybody adapted and you go through the draft. Well, you already had in person up to that point.
Yep.
Right? We had a lot of events through last fall and last winter. And then it was just the spring that got messed up and people were like, well, we've got a lot of banked information, no problem. Well, as we got into this year, there were two camps from what I kind of gathered from people. There was a camp of people and or teams that were like, they were working on plan D. They were going through all the different scenarios because we had no idea what football was going to look like, right? There was a time when the NFL was certainly on. Well, then maybe it's not. Well, then now we got to negotiate with the union. Like, those kind of things. College football's on or off. Conferences opted in and out. Like, there's been so much fluctuation. Like, there were people that were just prepping, right? What happens if? What happens if? And then I would talk to other people and they're like, it's football. It's going to go on. Like, no big, like, there were people up to early July who were like, we're going to go to campus all fall. Like, we're the NFL. Like, they're going to let us in. I remember asking, like, do you think you're going to let a traveler, right? You literally go from one place to another. Yeah. They're going to let you in the door when they're barely able to keep their own doors open. Like, they're sending staff home to work virtually because there's restrictions on how many people can be in the buildings based on state law. And they're like, yeah, we're the NFL. We'll let us in. I'm like, okay, best of luck to you. So the teams that were ahead of the game had contingencies. They knew what they were going to do. They recognized the adaptations they had to make in the spring, enhanced them over the summer, applied them in the fall, no big deal. And then you had the people chasing their tail. And they went through the whole fall. The Big Ten obviously played later.
Yep.
So then you get deadlines for meetings. When do we turn in reports? It's typically been at the beginning of December. Well, shoot, we didn't even have game film in on some of these kids until about then. So am I supposed to turn in a report on a kid on one game? And like, teams and people were just behind. Like, they just didn't know what to do. Now that we're into February, all that's been logged, right? All the game film's been studied. All the reports have been submitted. All the fall work's been done. It was done via Zoom meetings and everything else. And now, other than the pro days, we don't have anything else, right? Again, we could have a couple of Zooms with players. You can only have 3 people at a pro day. Not that that's really that much of a restriction. Historically, we haven't had many situations where you'd ever send.
You're sending 6 people. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, again, occasionally for the top quarterback, right? The group will go on the circuit, and so the group will be 3 now, but no problems. So that hasn't been much of a change. So I think scouts are kind of actually get maybe a little more time on their hands, like go back and check on some players and what have you. The biggest issue is the opt-in mechanism because the NCAA gave the extra year of eligibility.
Yep. Right.
So who was actually going to be in the draft class was the biggest frustrated point. Like, we have to know who's in and who's not so that we can get all our stuff done. With all that done, I mean, really now it's kind of kicked over to the decision makers in terms of like what they care about with this. But I think for most scouts, they're actually semi-relaxed.
Yeah, it's funny because talking with people around the league, like different scouts for different teams. You mentioned like the extra time. That's been good on my end because I've been able to catch up with more guys who are like, oh yeah, I've got some time. Oh yeah, I've been watching this position group. It's not what I've been assigned to, but I've got a little bit extra time, so I can knock out more guys, and I'm more willing to talk about some players. I want to ask you this because you mentioned getting to the decision makers, and I think there's kind of like an interesting dichotomy, almost like 2 sides that you could look at this offseason, look at this draft, in that you say, look, we have an opportunity here where since the information is cloudy all across the board, that maybe we've got guys in our top 50 that we're going to be able to get much later than we normally would in a typical draft. There's going to be opportunity here for us to collect high quality players that we view, if we trust our process, we're excited about that. And then there are other people I would feel that would like, hey, look, this is going to be even more of a crapshoot than it normally is. Let's try and make sure we get back to get more picks for next year, for down the road, where, that's where we start getting all of our information back. We get all our ducks in a row and we move forward. Is that kind of how you see it? How do you feel most people will kind of view this scenario?
I saw, when I talked to people this summer, this was my line to them. I think you've got two types of teams in this market. This stress is going to make teams that built staffs full of evaluators really comfortable. And if you built a staff full of information gatherers, you're scared.
Interesting.
Because it has been so easy to accumulate the information. And with everything being digital, you didn't need as much acumen in your lower ranks because they could get the information, then you could process it. Well, that's when you were getting seemingly high quality information from putting people into the building. Now on these Zoom calls, the prevailing thought is picture a member of a college staff on the call. There are, in some cases, 40 plus individuals from NFL organizations, Blesto NFS, maybe multiple scouts per team if a director or national cross-checker wants to be on, what have you.
Maybe like I was talking to Jim Nagy on the podcast on Journey to the Draft last week or 2 weeks ago, and he said, those guys were on those calls. They expanded that to really check a lot of boxes there with one call. So
you got 40 plus people.
Yeah.
Right? Put yourself in the shoes of the person at the university. These things are taped. This is recorded. This is like being in a deposition. That's the best way I can phrase it. Imagine you're on the stand and these people are firing questions at you. Do you think you're letting your guard down for a second to give the entire field of people really actionable information? Or do you just check the boxes, give the bare minimum, get out of the meeting, and then move on from there? And so that's been what, in most cases, there's not been, I'm sure there are some stories, but I haven't heard a lot of stories of this person was on the Zoom and they said all sorts of crazy stuff. It's been very sterile on those calls. And so now everybody that's on that call got the exact same information. In fact, you don't even need to put your scouts or execs on the call, right? You just take the copy of the call and they can watch it later. You can put a scouting assistant on the thing if you want to, just to record it. And so everyone starts with that same basic level of information now. And then if that's it, if you don't have the type of staff that, I know this guy in the building, I can go call this person will take my call. These colleges were going through so much, they didn't want to be on the phone personally with each of these people over and over and over again, unless they had a relationship. So if you didn't have the relationships, if you were new to an area or new to the industry or what have you, it became a lot harder to get, again, information that would differentiate you from the other 31 teams. Yeah. That's always how I view this. We look at the playing field as a competitive landscape, right? Most coaches or execs will get up in a press conference and talk about, I want competition in every room. Okay, well, extend that to the front office. If I'm a GM, I want competition amongst all my scouts in their area. Like, if you come back with the same information the other 31 guys got, you're not a value add to me. Like, I want you to get different information, better information than the 31 scouts in your area. And so that led to this discrepancy between, did you build a staff that knows how to go out and pull that, has built the relationships, they've had all those experiences, or did you not? And I think to answer your question, if you have that, I'm sure you're feeling pretty good right now, because you know that you've got an advantage over people that don't. And people that don't, I think, are going to look at that future. This kind of train of thought has led me to wonder, so let's take the Detroit Lions, for example. They trade Matthew Stafford. They have the 8th pick come in from Carolina as a potential package. They turn that down for 2 future Rams picks.
Yep.
That could be in the 20s. Could be 25 plus for all we know. But they thought that was more valuable than the 8th pick this year. And again, I don't know Brad Holmes. I don't have any inside baseball information here, but is it plausible that Brad said, I just got here, I only brought Ray Agnew. The rest of the staff, I have no idea what they know. And I don't want to be forced into making a quarterback decision in this year with this information that I have and a staff that's not mine. Give me an entire year to get them trained up on what I want, and then we'll go into the market with these 2 picks in the future. Seems plausible.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting. I'm glad you brought up, that team, specifically, because I think it's a great situation for our listeners to be able to look at and say, like, okay, this is what we're talking about here. Let me ask you this: what do you think that is the hardest thing teams are going to be missing from the process? You missed those in-person scouting, at games at the fall, because, there were some teams, I know like the SEC, they were basically holding a lottery every week and saying like, all right, like we're going to put 40 scout names into a hat. We're going to pull 10 out. These are the 10 guys that can come to our game. So, limited access to being able to see guys live. Then you've got the campus visits. You talked about being able to talk with sources, boots on the ground on a daily basis during the fall. You lose the majority of the all-star games. You got the combine, the in-person visit, the in-person exposures at the combine, the top 30 visits, those are gone. They're going to be Zoom calls, no private workouts. What aspect of this pre-draft process do you feel scouts, teams, decision makers are all going to be missing from this whole process?
The in-person seems to be the refrain, the chorus from everybody is we're going to miss the chance to sit with them face to face. We all are doing Zoom meetings. We're getting comfortable with that. And from the neck up, you can see people, but there's elements of body language that aren't there. There's the difference of sitting in a room with 15 to 20 people from that team in a combine interview, for example, versus being on a Zoom call with 15 to 20 people. Especially if people turn their camera off, right? There turns that little black box. That's not that scary. I don't care if the little black box is there.
Right.
Where if I'm sitting in that room and, maybe there's someone from the C-suite and I got a couple, GM, assistant GM, I got the head coach, I got all this stuff. And it's like, holy cow, like the whole lineup in here. Now, again, this is a hard question for me because I'm not the person that's like, ooh, in 15 minutes in the combine, like I'm going to perfectly nail down a human being.
Yep.
I've always kind of scoffed a little bit at that. It's the accumulation of those things, right? It's not the one meeting at the Senior Bowl. It's not the one meeting at the combine. It's not the 1:30 visit. It's when you stack all those, right? That's when we talk about the pre-draft process. You're talking about, I'm going to grab this person 5-6 times. Maybe there's a private, maybe we bring them in, maybe we just call them up. You get all of those. Maybe we scale it. Maybe we get to 10 different hits in terms of interactions with them. We're doing it from multiple places. And we want to see if anybody gets any different information or a different read or what have you. Well, as you scale those down, the volume of them, surely, but even some of the quality of them, can't go do a private, can't take them to dinner.
Yep.
Not going to have those visits, not going to have those hits. And I do think that's going to be a challenge for a player where the information was muddy on who they are as a person, right? My favorite line about this comes from Jerry Angelo, former Bears GM. And he always said, like, there's 2 types of players in the NFL. You have athletes playing professional football, and then you have professional football players, right? And so the Larry Fitzgeralds, the JJ Watts of the world, right? A professional football player, everybody kind of gets that. I think everybody would say I would sign up for that if it was available, if it was obvious. Okay. Then you have the other camp of the athletes playing professional football. They might not last, right? They might not be able to stick with the process of being a professional every single year. And you're trying to figure out what side of that spectrum this human being is in when they're 22, 23. They might not even have it fully figured out yet. I know, like, having a kid changed my life. I'm sure it has for others. So, you're trying to nail down all this stuff about a person. And when you scale back the opportunities to do that, again, I'm already in the camp of like 15 minutes. The combine isn't enough.
Right.
But now you're talking about, we only get a couple hits. We may spend an hour or 2 with them in general. Wow.
Yeah.
That's going to absolutely have an impact. We really will have some inclination after this into the systematic ability of an organization to put their finger on the pulse of like who this person is and, who's a little better at that than others.
So like for that reason, and you and I think the last time you came on this podcast, we talked about how important relationships are in the player acquisition phase. And we were looking more towards free agency. They're part of the offseason we're going to be hitting on first here. And we were talking about, look, so often you see a team acquire a player. Oh, well, this coach had him at this team, or, we scouted him a lot in college, or, whatever it is. There's a pre-existing relationship there. I look at this draft cycle and I say, to me, like the people that are making the decisions, the general managers, the head coaches, the high-ranking officials, the relationships they have with college teams all across the country are going to be more important than ever, because you're going to take that information as gold, because that's the differentiating factor that you were talking about earlier, right? Do you kind of see it that same way?
There's no doubt. It's always been a joke, right, about like Bill Belichick. There was the Rutgers kids when Schiano was there.
No doubt.
Ohio State kids when Urban Meyer was there. Like there was this constant pipeline of like, he knew what those guys were trained like, and then would get accurate information on who they were. And so they were always more inclined to do that. Yeah, the comfort piece, that's been the thing I can't nail down people in the industry is this kind of like last question of what will this matter for draft weekend?
Yep.
Right. So all of this is like the process. It's the stacking of the board. It's the acquiring information. It's the weighing and measuring and valuing the player, the human being. And all of that's going to be more challenging. But the culmination of that is, what do you do when you're on the clock? And I already think there's two camps of decision makers. You have decision makers that, from a baseball analogy standpoint, like doubles and on base percentage, man, that's their wheelhouse. They're going to get on base. We're going to put, on a grading scale, usually have a category of red, right? Solid starter, guy you can win with. They're going to go get red players.
Yep.
We're going to put a lot of red players in this roster. We're not going to miss on picks. We're not going to boom bust this thing. And then you have other decision makers that they're swinging for the fences. They want the urgent athleticism. They want, we'll cultivate the person, but we're going to buy things we can't teach kind of mentality. I think we've seen that for years. This year, I think some of the home run hitters who have always felt like they thought that, they thought they could see the pitcher tipping pitches, right? They always kind of felt like, I can swing on this one because I think I know what's coming. I don't think all the home run swingers are going to feel that way this year.
Right.
I think some of the home run swingers are going to look at it to be like, I don't think we're tipping pitches this year. I don't know what's coming. So yeah, I think we're going to have a lot more people swinging for doubles. And I think there's a really increased opportunity that a person with, questionable character, or someone that, has very inconsistent performance, did not show a consistent development trajectory, what have you, they're going to slide. I think there's a really high potential for those people to slide, which may be a rich get richer, right? Playoff teams might be.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Like, I feel like those scenarios they're right there for the taking. Like, it's going to be really fascinating.
I think going after night one, when we get to the top of the second, we have a whole day potential for trades. Yep. Those first 10 picks in the second round, I'm not sure any of the teams that are currently holding them will be using them, because there's going to be so much action on those. Because I think the boards are going to be, they're always variable, right? I mean, every team will admit, like, our board doesn't look like somebody else's. Every team will tell you they've got 17 to 20 first rounders, but then they still manage to take a kid in the second round we had a first round grade on.
Yep.
Because the boards vary. I think the boards are really going to vary. And, some team's going to walk away going like, yeah, we took her in the fifth round type deal or something, feeling really good about it because it came together that worked for them and the information that they gathered. And the market is not going to have as much consensus, right? Because that's where we really spend time working in the next few months, is you're trying to figure out the market.
Yep.
And it's something actually Howie does really well, is understand the market and what people may be willing to spend for this profile of this player, what have you. And I'm just not sure the market's going to have that level of consensus this year. And it really is going to be less of like playing the market. Okay, I need to get ahead of this team to get this player. It's just, I think we might see in the first round just more sitting on it, because it might just come right to you.
Yeah, I think that part of it is fascinating, especially because you talk about trying to find that consensus when, 25 scouts are at Clemson for a random day in October. They're all watching practice film, from what I've gathered. And I've only been in those rooms when I was at Temple, and this was a decade ago. But guys are talking, they're sharing, they're not sharing everything that you're writing down, but you're talking, and there's a little bit more buzz that's kind of built. Then you go to the combine and you see guys at St. Elmo's, you get a couple drinks and everyone's talking. All those things are out the door now. Like, that's gone. You're not getting lunch before a guy's pro day. You're not getting dinner with a guy before a private work. I think it's fascinating. It's going to be really fascinating.
You mentioned that there, and I love that because you're spot on. Like, yes, that you're able to get a lot of the feel in the market because people talk.
Yeah.
Right. People are not necessarily afraid of talking round grades because most like area scouts, for example, understand that their round grades can be modified by like the 7 people that come after them. So the final board grade is a departure from that scout's round grade, which is why so many round grades get thrown out in public, because what the hell does a scout care? That's not going to be the team's grade. Scouts will usually hide the team grade. They'll tell their grade on a player.
Right.
So yeah, that information flows, and especially in Indy and a few beers in, and that stuff moves. I will say this. I was talking to a scout about, the impact of this, and they were mentioning that when you come together as a staff for meetings, February or April, for example, you're obviously locked in those rooms for a lot of hours a day trying to put the board together. But then you pack all the scouts on a shuttle bus and you bring them to whatever hotel you use. And then those guys will then go down to the hotel bar and have a nightcap and stretch their legs a little bit. And in those bus rides and in those conversations there, it can be a really good place to flesh out a disagreement that you're having in the room. Like, the room's not always great for that debate, because it is a little more sterile and it's professional and it's rigid, and you don't want to be the person sucking time out of the whole room and the energy out of the whole room because you just can't get off this spot and no one's convinced you otherwise. But sometimes you're just like, forget it. I guess I'm out. Like, whatever, you guys do whatever the hell you want. I'm no longer going to fight this because I can't waste time on this one because I'm going to fight another player later on. Whereas then maybe you get in the bus and you do this and you have that conversation. Maybe you come back the next morning and 2 or 3 people have kind of worked this thing out a little bit, and they might present to the director like, hey, we might want to go over this player again. Like, there's just so many soft things about when you get human beings around each other that we all understand, because we all miss interaction, right? It's been almost a year now. We all miss gatherings. We know what that feels like, what it feels like to be shoulder to shoulder to somebody in the relaxed state that you're in versus the corporate feel of some of these other moments. And all of this is going to change things. I mean, how much and what that does for every player and every team and every draft slot. I mean, we won't know that, but there's no way we can look at this and say it's going to be normal.
You talked about earlier those interactions that you would have with players at a combine or at the pro day in person. Was there an instance that you can remember where, as you said, it was a culmination of those things? It wasn't necessarily one, face to face there, but was there one there where that interaction really sold you on a specific player?
Yeah, and they're probably a little too anecdotal and again, probably not scientific as I'd hope they would be. But there's moments when you go to these things and you're watching things like setup. You're watching them before they get going, like when people talk about the combine, a lot of the things that like scouts will talk about drawing from the combine is like when they're a group leader and they're walking the 15 players from thing to thing and who shows up on time. Like, I need you in the lobby at 11:45 and you're the guy that comes down 5 minutes later. Or I'm texting you to tell you something and you don't respond. Or we're telling you the directions and you're off putting your Instagram picture up.
Yep.
Like, we're watching all that stuff to figure out, like, are you dialed into this activity? Like, can you just stay with us on this? Because when we get to the practice field, we want you to pay attention. When we get to the meeting room, we want you to pay. If you can't pay attention in a job interview with cameras on you, like, are you really going to be, you're probably falling asleep in the meetings, right? And so being at certain pro days, and so there was a player at Wagner. And I went out to Staten Island, because when you're a young guy, you get to go to the really, really small places.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to Wagner to watch this hand in the dirt rusher who weighs 235, who there's no way he's going to play in the NFL down there. And, trying to get a beat on, do I think he's the kind of guy that can transfer to a different position? And so, that jump to a different position, obviously we were going to have to play him standing up at linebacker. Yeah. And so that means he's going to have to take a lot of coaching and a lot of technique and a lot of development to take his hand out of the dirt and do an entirely different thing. And, we go to do the setup and you're trying to get everything else done. You just can't stop watching this kid, like there early, not messed around, like had like everything in his bag laid out. Like he knew, like, here's my shoes, here's my, like everything that he needed to do. Like he laid it all out, and like you're watching him put this stuff together. And it made me feel really good about being able to make the argument that if he's that diligent on his own to set up for a pro day where it's me and 3 other young guys who collectively have like 4 years of NFL experience, and he doesn't care. He's just, this is his shot. He's going to take advantage of it. And his name was Julian Stanford. And he ended up playing as a special teamer for the Buffalo Bills for a lot of years and being able to fill in other places. And it just, I fought for him. I fought for, like, this is the kind of kid that if we're going to take, a priority undrafted free agent that is not exactly a position fit, like this is the right type of person. So always rooted for him. And it was excited to see the longevity of his career from something like watching him like unpack his bag and prep for his pro day.
So I love that story. And I was trying to think of an example coming into this interview of, was there one from your career where, like, almost like the equivalent to an opt-out of a guy that there was just such a small sample size? And the one I landed on was, I believe it was your final draft here in Philly, I believe. And it's Bryce Brown. When he was at Kansas State, didn't play that final season. So that, I mean, he had like something like 48 touches in the last 2 years that he was on campus. Is that what was that like getting ready for that draft? As that's going to be the pick. I guess that whole process, planning for Bryce Brown and seeing the early success that he had in Philadelphia.
It was actually less of a stretch for me coming off the pro side. So with the college scouts, usually watch a full-time starter who's probably been a full-time starter for 2, if not 3 years, right?
Sure.
So not only do you have the senior season or redshirt junior, what have you, but you can go and draw from other seasons. On the pro side, like the first thing we do is go through camp and prep for cuts. And you're watching people play in the preseason. And I'll never forget putting in reports on players that had 16 preseason snaps because they were the guy that only got to play in the fourth quarter. And you're still trying to generate a projection, which is nothing more than a prediction of the future, right? Pull out your crystal ball. Let's figure out what this might look like. And we do have a report from the player in college, from the college scout, that you can draw upon, but that's not what you're tasked with, right? You're tasked with taking new exposure in doing that. And so it's certainly not ideal by no stretch of the imagination, or 48 snaps or 16 snaps or 35 snaps, the ideal way to do that. But you do get some practice at being able to say, like, hey, here are 3 or 4 traits that I think are obvious. And then obviously there's a lot of question marks, but these traits I think relate to this type of play and what have you. And then again, it always comes back to, do they want to be a professional football player? To use that Angelo analogy.
Right.
And that's always the other stuff that you're going to figure out. So when you had a player like him where the 10 was obvious with Bryce, and then you're trying to figure out, will he do the other things? And, it's hit or miss. I think he was a 7th round pick.
Yep.
If I remember correctly. And down there, I think everybody's going to be a home run swinger.
Sure.
I mean, you got a guy with a really special athletic ability and doesn't cost you that much. And you want to make sure you don't have to bid on him in undrafted free agency. Let's just grab him with the draft pick. Because the signing bonuses can get, start to get big when you're competing with 3 or 4 other teams, which I'm sure you would have for him. And you're just going, there's enough to take this shot. I mean, who wouldn't take a blue chip athlete in the 7th round? I think it's an easier thing to get there on, because at least you can get the testing stuff figured out.
How do you feel everybody's going to be looking at these opt-outs? Obviously, every player is going to be different, and the different circumstances with which they decide not to play. But overall, how do you feel that the majority of these guys will, how's it going to impact them?
It's all filmed before, and they work out their pro day, and so you can get updated, movement testing stuff on them. I think that's going to be the one that'll be scary. If there's no testing on an opt-out, that's a hard profile to get comfortable with, unless the film's obvious in terms of ability. And so that'll be the thing that I think will throw up. As long as they go out and do their pro day, I think there's been enough of it. It was enough of a mess of a year. We're filling in gaps anyway. I don't anticipate seeing drops out of opt-outs again, as long as they go and do the testing.
Well, dude, I have like a million other questions I can ask you, but we've gone for about 30 minutes now, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. This was awesome. Dan, thanks so much for joining us once again here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, great stuff there from Dan, who you can follow on Twitter, just like I do, at Dan_Hatman. And while you're at it, I'm at EaglesXOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce here with Eagles Entertainment. And you know I greatly appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on all forms of social media. That's one way to support this show, but the best way is to go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, or even leave us a comment. I want to give a shout out today to someone who left a rating and a comment. That's BirdGang72, left a 5-star review, just saying how much they loved the Danny Woodhead episode. This was from 2 Mondays ago before the Super Bowl. Really feel like I learned a lot more about the potential Eagles offense and what it would look like from anything else I have read so far. Bird Gang, glad you enjoyed that episode with Danny Woodhead. He was a really fun guest. We got into a lot of different topics there. Only one more question here in the queue. You know what that means? All you have to do is go on now. Apple Podcasts, leave a question, leave a rating. We'll answer it here coming up on a future episode. Thanks so much to BirdGang72 and all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here at Eagles Entertainment. All that being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the Duffy House, I am Fran Duffy. We'll talk to you later this week.
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.